Hello. The more I learn about ADHD, the less qualified I feel to talk about it. Even though I've been gathering information on it over years to help me with my own mental struggles, the fact that I've always been bad at science, as well as how complex and nuanced the conversations are and how they constantly develop, make it so that I feel very overwhelmed by even the prospect of talking about it. Like, I'm nervous to make the right points, you know? And so when I came up with the idea to make a video called, "Does everybody have ADHD now?" I recognized that although there was a lot of interesting stuff to say about the seeming burst of popularity the disorder has gained on social media lately, I wasn't quite sure how to tackle it. And this feeling just got stronger and stronger with the more research that I did. Eventually, I remembered a comment that was left on the poll with which that topic won, telling me they were a bit nervous about me doing that video because another commentary YouTuber and musician, Madison Brown, did a recent video on a similar topic. And they expressed fear that I'd seem like I was copying her, a YouTuber who's bigger than me, who's done big videos about Jack Harlow and Doja Cat and stuff. So I decided to check out the video, look at the comments, see the kind of reaction it's getting, and then I realized I knew exactly what I wanted to talk about. In her video, "Everybody's Got Autism Now, and Apparently So Do I," Madison Brown discusses how a recent TikTok of hers about preferring doing things alone prompted multiple people to relate with it as a potential experience of autistic people, even suggesting that she may have it too. She seems to have an incredulous reaction to these suggestions.
I have known myself for quite some time, and I know many things to be true about myself, one of them being I am not autistic. However, strangers on the internet who have gotten to know me through a 2-minute video seem to think they have the range and the wherewithal to diagnose me with autism, or at the very least speculate and suggest that I may have autism.
And the rest of the video is an analysis she brings forth in which she criticizes trends that seem to popularize self-diagnosis of autism under the guise of spreading awareness of it. Towards the end of the video, Brown, who is allistic, meaning non-autistic, questions whether or not white self-diagnosed people are using their neurodivergent status as a way to put themselves in the same kind of category as other marginalized people and thus avoid their own white privileges, and also questions whether or not we should gatekeep autism.
I think there are certain things in this world that we should be allowed to gatekeep, and I feel like autism might be one of those things, you know? In 2023, we're gatekeeping autism and bamboo earrings. Yeah.
So this video has not been well received. Although it has amassed over 7K likes, almost all of its most popular comments are strongly worded criticisms from people who identify as autistic. One major point of criticism among many was towards her use of stats from the organization Autism Speaks, which has been widely considered a hate group towards autistic people thanks to the efforts of autistic activists. Others just took issue with her depiction of self-diagnosis entirely. This video never really hit on the barriers there are to formal diagnosis and why it seems like so many people are self-diagnosing. There is important context to this besides the perception that people want to be trendy.
Just because you posted a video that got some traction and resonated with autistic people doesn't mean that you get to dismiss self-diagnosis because you were mad that some of your traits are relatable to autistic people. Now, yes, there are some people who misdiagnose themselves as autistic, but you know what the worst thing that would happen to them would be? Is that they start to place accommodations into their lives that make their lives easier. The supposed harm that improperly self-diagnosed autistic people are doing to the autistic community, according to you, isn't actually true. It is because of the increase in people being open about autism and how it affects them that more people are actually seeing autism as something that they need to take seriously and understand more. We're speaking about it and making it front of mind. We're not hiding in the shadows, being shoved away on small buses and in corner classrooms to not participate and be a part of society. Instead, we are proudly and boldly showing ourselves and showcasing how multifaceted we are and how real and three-dimensional we are. And because of that, we're seeing a lot of the things that were dismissed away as just being quirky or a series of quirky traits can be autism. Now, is it always autism? No, but there isn't actually any real harm in there being an expansion of people understanding and identifying with autistic people. The way she was saying we need to gatekeep autism is like we're stealing some kind of resources from the people who have formal diagnoses. Not only are there barely any resources for autistic people, especially autistic adults, but even when you have a formal diagnosis, you have to jump through hoops to get the scarcity of resources that there are. By us expanding awareness and changing the face of autism and showing the true spectrum of who we are, we're actually helping to open the community and bring the much needed resources that aren't already there.
She talks about autistic content being very broad, and that's why everybody identifies as autistic nowadays. Autistic content being very broad, or any type of content on TikTok, needs to be specifically focused to TikTok, because TikTok is a social media platform that has an emphasis on virality. So, of course, any creators are going to be trying to make content that appeals to a wider niche or a lot of people. The external world is aware of autism. The external world is autism awareness. But I think what's changed is that autistic creators, autistic people in general, are now starting to be accepting of themselves and put themselves out there, i.e. TikTok, social media, without the external world's acceptance. That is not called an aesthetic. That is called a shifting cultural trend within autistic people.
In the time since the video came out, Brown, despite the pleas of some people, has not offered an apology and instead left a Patreon message in which she communicated that she felt like she was being misinterpreted. So my thing is, this type of reaction and the apparent reality that neurodivergent people are being affected negatively by such content is not all about a content creator being careless with the info in a video. It's not about careless jokes being made in the video. I think for me, it's more about whether or not there's something reactionary about rhetoric that questions self-diagnosis as something done for clout, as something trendy. To be clear, when I say reactionary politics or reactionarism is a term that refers to politics, a political stance that calls for a move to the status quo ante, meaning the things that were there before were better. Move back to the way things were before, basically, right? And it's not necessarily a left or right wing position, because leftists and right wingers can do so. It's more so about that nature of a politics. And it's usually used in a pejorative way, especially on the left, because a lot of the time when people talk about things like that, they're wrong. They're being very naive about how good things were before, or about how the way things were before were a lot better, and are being kind of bad in terms of their analysis. In this case, Brown's points are reactionary in that they cite new trends on TikTok and social media overall as creating new types of harm, and as doing so unnecessarily, doing little to address why these things are popping up in the first place and just dismissing them. Now, I'm not saying that popular content that spreads awareness of disorders in good or bad ways and encourages people even to get self-diagnosis is above criticism. But when you don't recognize the potential for empowerment in a new trend, and you're dismissive towards the autistic voices, the voices in this so-called trend that are speaking up positively about it and the conditions that made it this way, whether or not this way is good or bad, because things were worse before, when you're dismissive of all of those things, ultimately that's a type of reactionary politics. It's one that makes me really uncomfortable and that feels very conservative and very not good towards marginalized people. It's like, oh, the way people were talking about autism before was better. This thing that we're doing with these disorders now with autism, not good. Probably based on people being self-absorbed. I don't know. Bad. It's a type of bad politics that relies on the viewer's uncomfortableness with a certain thing that's new in order to compensate for a lack of substantiation in the argument. But the reason I'm choosing to talk about this and choosing to frame this video about mental disorders overall is because it also translates a lot to the way people are talking about ADHD. In fact, one of the few positive comments I was able to see on Brown's video said that, "I feel like this is also happening in the ADHD community. There's so much misinformation that's being spread because people online are viewing these neurodivergencies as some kind of online trend or social currency." there we are again. This new trendy stuff, it's bad. It's spreading bad information. And it's like people are just doing it to get trendy, to get social currency. Like, what's the substance behind that? It'd be one thing if we were just straight up counteracting myths that are being spread. If we were just straight up pointing out specific falsehoods and then giving good information in response and uplifting the voices of the people who know better and who experience these things. But we're not doing that. We're just saying, come on, these kids, like they're just trying to be disordered for clout. So you know what? After the ad break, let's talk about how this relates to other neurodivergencies, specifically ADHD, the way that this disproportionately affects marginalized people, including people like you would die, people who have less power. And at the end of the video, I'll talk about my own experiences. So here's an ad. So a lot of conversation has been had about this rise in ADHD self-diagnoses and content about it. If you go on TikTok, you'll probably see exponentially more content similar to the ones about autism that Madison Brown was so against about ADHD. It'll be no surprise to you that a lot of people, maybe people around you, for instance, are wondering if they have ADHD or joking about them probably having ADHD or watching videos that are getting very popular by creators like How to ADHD and Healthy Gamer GG, as well as a ton of other creators, some better than others, I guess we can say. And while this effort at destigmatizing mental health and connecting people with information that may get them diagnosed can be extremely positive in a lot of its effects, it's also very valid to be concerned by that. An article by Camille Williams for Attitude examines the pros and cons of self-diagnosing after being influenced by social media content. It makes ADHD strategies accessible, but it doesn't do well to highlight actual expertise and good information. It shatters stigma, but it also oversimplifies ADHD, which can often be more severe than videos' claims of just forgetting things or caffeine naps. But the last point that's made in the article, that TikTok may be inspiring people to claim they have a disorder they don't have and thus downplaying ADHD, is one that I have some issues with. Because, like, don't get me wrong, okay? There's a lot of people probably that are more flippant sometimes about having ADHD because they procrastinated or they forgot to do the dishes. And it's normal for people who don't have ADHD to be careless sometimes, to have periods where they have no attention span, especially in the social media age. But this concern about downplaying ADHD or that, oh, most people have ADHD sometimes or whatever, these are things that have been happening for a long time, way before TikTok. If anything, these social media platforms, despite all their problems, are inadvertently bringing a lot more positive content with good information to the forefront than ever. There's more resources available online than ever to help people deal with this, whether or not they have it. One of my issues is that concern about this apparent carelessness is met with a lot of accounts of ADHD being this very serious illness. It's met with all these conversations about it ruining your life and not just being an annoyance, right? And yeah, that happens in a lot of people's lives and those accounts are extremely valid, but we also have to remember that ADHD is a spectrum disorder. That's scientifically true. It affects everybody who has it a little bit differently, and it's quite possible that maybe even most people who have it don't have these severe, life-debilitating issues as a result. Maybe they just have some problems that we see as more minor. And what we do is we essentially essentialize ADHD as well as autism, which is also a spectrum disorder, as being something that ruins lives and something that you're almost never going to figure out from your own experiences watching TikToks. And that has the effect of ignoring and discouraging people whose issues are less severe. It also in turn encourages people to allow their issues to worsen and even exaggerate them in order to feel validated in having a serious disorder or disability. I feel like we should have learned this lesson from depression. But another big concern I have that I feel is really clear is that downplaying self-diagnosis, no matter who you're picturing in your head, has serious socio-political ramifications for the people that often self-diagnose the most, which is marginalized people, poor people, black people, brown people, people who are not in positions where they can diagnose easily and who are more used to their issues being downplayed.
So a lot of people don't know that it is legal to pay a person with a developmental difference, such as autism, less than minimum wage.
This commenter stated, with a professional diagnosis of ASD, a person would be unable to serve in the U.S. military or obtain citizenship in Australia.
But a diagnosis of autism has halted his plans, disqualifying him from the armed forces.
In the Black community, we really don't talk about mental health. there's very much a stigma around ADHD in the African American community. Not so much as a stigma as much as it goes unrecognized.
Black people are more concerned with diagnosis in the sense of, I don't want them just trying to put a label on my child, which is something you do have to worry about in the Black community. But on the other end, there's lots of people that are underdiagnosed because a lot of the, kids that are presenting with behavior problems are kids that maybe are struggling in school, that are kids of color, Black or indigenous specifically. They just think they just don't know it. Like, they're not looking for anything else.
I'm not trying to say this like, oh, all Black people are poor, but a lot, especially in like inner cities, we live in places that don't have, a lot of funds. And if there's something that's behind a paywall, that's not going to get a lot of high priority. Food, bills, electricity, all that stuff, that's going to come first.
There's a lot of reason for the Black community to not trust doctors. There was a lot of experiments performed. There's a lot of dismissing of symptoms. There's a lot of health disparities. And psychiatry in general has a large history in eugenics.
I find myself a lot in predominantly white settings. So I'm racially othered. When I was growing up, I just thought that feeling of not belonging was because I was the only 2 Black kids in a class of 30. Like, I thought it was just that. I didn't realize that I was autistic. Basically, I got labeled as having anger management issues, I believe, looking back now, because I was from a single parent household. I was the Black child in the class. I was loud. I was defiant. So the prejudices of my race meant that it took longer for me to be diagnosed.
As Dr. Devon Price articulated in a recent Instagram story, responding to a TikTok very similar to Brown's video, when we create a culture of doubting self-diagnosed people's disabilities, guess who we harm most? The people who are least able to access diagnosis, who are overwhelmingly Black and brown. A lot of this type of dismissiveness towards the self-diagnosis trend is resting on a Fox News level of moral panic that is unfortunately also very popular among left-leaning people. There's this moral panic that online progressive spaces, or progressive spaces in general, where people are thinking new thoughts about things and identities, are filled with just privileged kids from nice homes who are exaggerating their problems to get attention or to get away with being lazy. Like, okay, yeah, you don't have ADHD just because you forget things sometimes, just because you get hyperactive, whatever. But what does a person benefit from being dismissed outright? Knowing that there's this apparent trend, this panic about people exaggerating their symptoms, and then withholding and going, you know what, I'm not going to consume this at all, I'm not going to think about this at all. And maybe they have a serious issue, even if it isn't ADHD, that needs them to start thinking critically about it. Even though we see this rhetoric happen all the time, all these moral panics about the kids doing bad things, we fall for it over and over again because it's very easy and convenient to think that all the kids online or most of the kids online are just jerks and they're ruining the world and that they're not actually people with these problems. So, to conclude the video, in the absence of a lot of statistics and empirical analysis, I think I will give my own perspective on self-diagnosis based on my own experience after the break. So in case you don't know, I'm 26 years old. I am from New York and I was born to 2 Dominican immigrants. And growing up, I always had severe issues with hyperactivity and focus in class. I would fall asleep during class presentations, and I guess you would call those lectures. I don't know, lectures about 4th grade science. I was always procrastinating. I would sometimes drool in my desk or fiddle with my hands. I could never figure out how to study. I had a bunch of bad hygienic habits. I never even learned how to tie my shoes until I was like in the 4th grade. And despite all this, I, especially when I was younger, did extremely well in school, particularly in writing courses and in creative activities. And I was often told as a result that I was a daydreamer. One teacher used to tell me that I would lose my head if it wasn't attached to my body. You know, the old joke. Above all else, people around me were constantly telling me that I had this tremendous potential, this tremendous brain. I was so smart, and if only I just applied myself a little more, focused a little more, cared a little bit more, then I would be able to fulfill that potential and, I don't know, go to Stuyvesant. Really, I feel like I turned out pretty well, but I don't know. I guess I would have done better if I went to Stuyvesant. I always knew that I was different and that people weren't being very fair to me, but I had no way of articulating that. My parents told me they were sure that I didn't have ADHD because when I wanted to focus, I was extremely focused. As it turns out, That's called hyperfocus, and it's one of the main parts of having ADHD. But they didn't dismiss me having a potential disorder because they didn't care. It's actually to the contrary. They were scared and they didn't know exactly what to make of it. My parents didn't grow up with social media, with TikTok. They grew up poor in what many people would call a third world country, where a lot of these ideas about disability and identity, especially back in those times, was certainly confusing and foreign to them. And they couldn't possibly have sorted it out with how little resources they had and how busy they were all the time. Above all else, they knew that there was a stigma towards kids with disabilities, and they didn't want me to deal with that. So it was only when I was around like 20 years old, when I had tons and tons of unfinished projects and problems in school and problems in relationships, and I was very temperamental and often very impulsive and dealing with all types of anxieties and depressions, when I realized, hey, damn, I may have ADHD. So I did my research, I did the surveys, I checked all the damn boxes I saw, and eventually I knew damn well that if I didn't have it, I had it, you know? But getting diagnosed at a fairly nearby, well-acclaimed place was going to cost a lot of money, $800. I didn't have that money, and I suspected that my parents, who, you know, weren't poor at this point. I'm not poor, but we didn't have the kind of money we thought we needed to allocate to that. My parents, especially post-recession, would not be willing to spend that much in my mind, especially when the idea of getting a positive diagnosis didn't necessarily come with ideas of all these benefits. Like, what did you really get out of it? So I just said, whatever, I probably have it. I'm going to live as if I have it, and if it turns out that I don't actually have it, then I'll probably have benefited from the experience anyway. And so that's what I did. I did extensive research on different techniques and stimulant medication. They helped a lot. I'm finally able to make myself work when I want to work, mostly, and I can do things like going to train martial arts or lift weights sometimes and not quit within 5 minutes of doing it because I have this physical issue that I feel is just completely debilitating my mind to the point I'm overwhelmed. Like, what about this kink in my back? What about this kink in my back? Oh, I'm tired. And then just giving up. You know, I don't do that anymore. Or I kind of do. And of course, there are negatives to medication too that I'm trying to sort through. But every day is an opportunity to learn something new, usually through the internet, to help me with whatever the hell brain I have, thanks to these ADHD resources. And I, for one, think that's a good thing. I think it's good. I can't imagine what would have happened to me had I simply avoided all the ADHD videos and never tried to get medication because I never got an official diagnosis. But of course, I'm just one person. There may be a ton of people out there who maybe don't have ADHD, who maybe don't have the same life that I've lived, who have some experiences with inattentiveness and see these TikToks and think to themselves, well, maybe I have this, because they're looking for a way to enumerate, to explain that struggle. To that, I say this. If ADHD content, which is ever flowing, anybody can access it, and medication, which is not ever flowing and not everybody can always access it, are going to people who don't have ADHD but just want to help themselves, I think that's probably a good thing too. I don't really care. I mean, I want people to get help. I think people who need help should get help, and that process often means trying different things, seeing what works and what doesn't, seeing what different explanations come. Sometimes it's not as clear cut as, oh, I definitely have ADHD, let me start doing the thing. Sometimes it's, maybe I have ADHD, not sure, I tried it. I tried the Adderall, tried some of the advice. Maybe I have this, maybe I don't. Maybe I just have a bad time in life and I just need some help with it in a different way. Ultimately, people deserve to go through that process at the very least. They deserve to get better. If medication runs out because too many people are buying it, the problem there is not the people. It's with the pharmaceutical companies who push these products and then create a scarcity with them artificially so as to increase their capital. Most of the people who are curious, wondering aloud if they have a disorder, are not going to undergo tremendous life changes under the assumption they have it without doing extensive research. They're just going to go, oh, I think I have ADHD or I think I have autism, and then learn about it, see what they can do. And if their life changes for the better because they got some relief in some other way and it turns out it wasn't that at all, they're probably going to forget that they even thought that they had it. They're probably just going to move on and say, thank God I don't have a disorder. I just needed some help in something else. They're usually not just going to jump straight into Adderall.
the act of self-diagnosing takes more information, research, and time than just TikTok. We should not demonize the people seeking to explore and learn and understand themselves better, but instead seek to correct the misinformation that is out there and support better, more concise information so people who do not have access to mental health care can self-diagnose safely and efficiently. So let's stop perpetuating this negative stereotype that TikTok is making mental health trendy, when in actuality it's just allowing people to learn about themselves, and that's a good thing.
At the end of the day, people have to decide for themselves how to treat their own situations. The fact that we don't have the resources to be certain of what we have and to ensure everybody gets treated is not our fault. It's a systemic problem that we're all coming up with solutions to in our own lives. When we push this stigma that ADHD and autism can only be rare, debilitating disorders, and that people saying that they have these disorders after learning some info without being 100%, 1000% sure, whatever that means, are just ignorant and searching for attention, we throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is bad because babies are good. Even while some may make mistakes in their self-diagnosis, that doesn't downplay the positives for the people who are legit and who needed that help with those resources because their lives were too difficult for them to get help in the more conventional way. Replace your energy for moral panic with energy for fighting oppression. Because the problem's not a bunch of weird individuals, okay? The problem is systemic. I don't know why Madison Brown seemed to be so disturbed by the suggestion that she may have autism. There's nothing wrong with having autism. I will say it's not ideal that strangers label a stranger as potentially autistic based off of one experience. I get that. But it's certainly not offensive to have to consider it a bit based off of other people's experiences. But it's that stigma that disorder is something that has to be life-breaking and debilitating for just a few special people and nothing else. That has to be uprooted. It has to stop. We all need help, and finding that help is a messy process. Don't make it worse by being closed-minded. Thanks for watching. Hit like, comment, send a Ko-Fi. Tell me what you think about the way disorders are talked about right now on TikTok. Did you think I did an adequate job? Are there some things I'm missing? Or do you like my hoodie? It's new. It's a new hoodie. See you. Take care.